Want to see two sellouts? They were so real for that, not gonna lie. After Sonic 2 had been released to the world, Sega had realized that Sonic was a big deal, and instead of waiting to make a sequel like they did with Sonic 2, Sega immediately went to Sega Technical Institute to ask Yuji Naka and Hirokazu Yasuhara to work on a third game. At first, Naka wasn't up for it, being fresh out of Sonic 2's development, but he ultimately agreed to working on a third Sonic game so long as he only worked with the Japanese half of STI, as to avoid the cultural and language barriers that made Sonic 2's development absolute hell. At first, the team had intended on using Sega's SSP-1601 chip, more commonly known as a Sega Virtual Processor, or SVP. This chip was effectively Sega's answer to the Super Nintendo's Super FX chip, which allowed for extremely primitive 3D. However, due to both the cost of the chip and time constraints, Sega had demanded that Sonic 3 be a traditional 2D Sonic game. While the plans for a 3D Sonic game were scrapped, Naka and Yasuhara had intended for Sonic 3 to be a much bigger game than Sonic 2 was. However, once again, due to time constraints and something about a McDonald's toy deal, the game would sadly only be half the game it was supposed to be, releasing on the 2nd of February, 1994. With me, I remember first playing Sonic 3 through Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection for the PlayStation 3 when I was around 8 or 9 years old. I remember not knowing how to do the spin dash and getting stuck in Angel Island Zone Act 2, where these logs would spin around on the water. As for the game's plot, Sonic had just thwarted Eggman's plans of launching the Death Egg, an orbital space station that would serve as Eggman's base of operations. As the ship went up in flames, it had fallen lower and lower until it had crashed into a floating island, pinning it to the sea below and causing a massive tsunami. A few days later, Tails had picked up a strong energy signal from a radar he had invented, and thinking it might be related to the recent tsunami, he immediately went to tell Sonic about it. Meanwhile, Sonic himself was taking a nap at a beach when he woke up to find an odd ring with ancient letters on it that reminded him of an old tale he was told. The tale was about a grand civilization that used some sort of stone of power to achieve prosperity. That wasn't until they were ultimately punished for getting greedy with their power, wiping the civilization off the face of the planet. Shortly after, a chunk of the continent the civilization once lived in had risen to the sky, with the civilization and this stone of power never to be seen again. Of course, Sonic, feeling adventurous and strangely nostalgic, immediately hopped into his plane alongside Tails and headed in the direction of the energy signature. Upon closing in on the energy signature, Sonic and Tails arrived just off the coast of this strange island. Presumably wanting to wrap things up quickly, Sonic uses the power of the Chaos Emeralds to turn into Super Sonic and speeds on up to the shore. However, upon reaching the island, Sonic gets the super knocked clean out of him by some red jerk by the name of Knuckles the Echidna, who's been tricked by Eggman into thinking Sonic is bad news. Now, Sonic and Tails not only have to get the Chaos Emeralds back, but they need to figure out whatever no-good plan Eggman's up to, and stop him before it's too late. As always, the gameplay revolves around getting to the end of the stage as fast as possible by using optimal routes, momentum, and power-ups to your advantage, while collecting rings to protect yourself from damage. However, this time there's a few welcome additions to the game. For starters, Sonic 3 has a save system, a series second. Sonic CD also had a save system utilizing the Sega CD's backup memory, but here the save system is much more robust, featuring multiple save files and a character select. You have the choice between Sonic alone, Tails alone, or Sonic and Tails together. This time choosing your character actually affects how you play the game. Tails can fly and swim for a short time by pressing the jump button repeatedly mid-air, making him perfect for exploration. As for Sonic, he has a new ability known as the Insta-Shield. I prefer to call it the Pathological Lie. See, it implies that it would reflect projectiles like the new shields in this game, more on those later, but what the Pathological Lie actually does is provide a few frames of invincibility and extend Sonic's attack box. It's a really useful ability, especially for taking out the bosses in this game, but I feel like it's a little off? I would expect that the character named Sonic would have maybe some sort of air dash to gain some speed mid-air or something like that. Some sort of extra mobility option. Thankfully, the all-new elemental shields help with Sonic's lack of mid-air mobility. These are scattered in monitors throughout the stages and are one of 3 elements: fire, lightning, and water. All of them provide some sort of elemental resistance, reflect most projectiles, and replace Sonic's Insta-Shield ability with a new mid-air ability. The bubble shield prevents the need to chase for air underwater and gives Sonic a bounce ability when you press the jump button mid-air. The fire shield grants immunity to fire hazards and gives Sonic an air dash, but will extinguish if it comes into contact with water. And finally, the lightning shield, my personal favorite, grants immunity to the 2 electrical hazards in the game, draws in rings, and gives Sonic a double jump, but shorts out if you come into contact with water. All 3 of these shields are really useful, if a little bit situational. The weakest one in my opinion being the bubble shield, whose relevance pretty much ends after Hydro City, especially if you're playing as Tails since he cannot use any of the shield's abilities. Sonic 3 also introduces a bonus game, not to be confused with the special stages that net you the Chaos Emeralds. The bonus game is accessed by crossing a star post with around 50 rings and jumping into the ring of stars that form around it. Jumping in will take you to this gumball machine looking thing where you bounce back and forth in a shaft hitting the turner as the machine travels lower and lower. The machine dispenses lives, rings, shields, a rubber orb that repels you, and a bubble that does nothing. At the bottom of the shaft is a pad of springs that falls down when they're used. Falling to the bottom of the shaft after the pad of springs is destroyed will kick you out of the bonus game. Overall, the bonus game is okay. I don't really find it fun, but it's pretty convenient to jump in, bounce around, and come out with a couple more rings, a new shield, and an extra life. Of course, since how you access the bonus game is how Sonic 2 handled the special stages, how you access the special stages here is completely different. This time you have to search for these giant rings, usually hidden behind a wall you can walk through or something breakable. The special stages themselves are actually pretty fun. They're known as the now iconic Blue Sphere special stages. So this is what they meant by getting blue-balled. The goal of these special stages is to collect all the blue spheres in the stage while avoiding the red spheres, which will kick you out of the stage. Any blue sphere collected will turn into a red sphere, and tracing the perimeter of a group of blue spheres will collect them all, turning any red spheres and blue spheres into rings. Collecting all of the rings in these stages will net you a perfect, giving you 50,000 points and a continue. There's also these star spheres that will reverse Sonic's movement, making him move backwards. You can fix this by pressing up on the D-pad or by bumping into another star sphere. The longer you spend in the special stage, the faster you'll go, the music speeding up along with you, making for increasingly tense gameplay. I really like these, and I find the pre-rendered sprites to be especially charming. Really, the only two nitpicks I have are, firstly, the frame rate. Granted, it's not as bad as the half-pipe from Sonic 2, but it's not the best either. And secondly, the way the special stages handle the order you collect the Chaos Emeralds is a little odd to me. Whenever you fail a special stage, instead of returning to the special stage you failed at when you hop into another big ring, you're pushed forward to the next special stage. It just sort of confuses me. I mean, when I lose a life in Angel Island, I don't move forward to Hydro City. No, instead, I respawn from the last checkpoint I touched or restart the stage and learn from my mistake. It's nothing major, it just strikes me as a little odd. Of course, collecting all 7 Chaos Emeralds lets you turn into Super Sonic, and he works exactly as he did in Sonic 2, outside of the fact that you have to press the jump button twice in order to actually confirm that you want to transform into Super Sonic. Really, the only problem I have with this approach is the fact that now you can't really use the Insta-Shield if you have over 50 rings, otherwise you'll just immediately transform into Super Sonic. They should have made it to where you had to press a different button to confirm transforming. It's also a little frustrating that shields take priority over transforming into Super Sonic, meaning you'll have to purposefully lose your shield to transform, and once again, just like in Sonic 2, Tails doesn't have a super form, and it still confuses me. But moving on to the visuals, Sonic himself has seen a slight redesign with darker fur, larger hands, and more rounded off shoes. I personally prefer this design to the Sonic 2 design, but I couldn't tell you why. Tails has also seen a very mild redesign, but overall looks about the same as he did back in Sonic 2. Although, some of his rotating sprites make his tails look like shriveled up raisins. On top of that, all the machines also look really nice too. Most of them have reflective-esque highlights that really make them look like they're made out of metal this time around. As always, all the environments in this game look really colorful and have interesting and distinct environments. As much as I love Sonic CD's visuals, I'm not going to deny that its visuals could be a little bit too abstract, and I'm happy to report that in Sonic 3, things are a little bit more grounded. The lively jungle of Angel Island, the canals of Hydra City, the mountainous temples of Marble Garden, the bright lights and bumpers of Carnival Night, the icy caves and snowy icebergs of Ice Cap, and the industrial spaceport facility of Launch Base. The music itself is great as always, even without the CD quality audio of the Mega CD, or the Sega CD if you're weird. I suppose now would probably be a good time to mention that there's a slightly different song for each act of a given zone. For example, Act 1 of Angel Island is energetic but peaceful, but after you clear Act 1 and move on to Act 2, the music becomes more desperate given that the jungle was just turned into the world's biggest bonfire. My favorite song from the game has to be the Act 1 boss theme. It really does sound like you're just in a scrap with a lesser henchman. The boss just comes down and the music goes Come on! Speaking of zones and mini-bosses, the level structure has been altered ever so slightly once again. There's still 2 acts per zone, but this time the end of Act 1 has a mini-boss, only taking 6 hits to beat. I find this really neat from a narrative sense. Eggman's seen Sonic before, he knows what he can do, so he's throwing everything he's got at him. While it's a little slower than what Sonic 2 did, I don't think this really harms the pacing of the stages, especially if you know how to handle the bosses. The stage design itself took cues from Sonic CD, as seen with the big rings, and Sonic 2, as seen with everything else, and blended them together to create one giant stage filled with plenty of goodies, lots of speed, and interesting stage gimmicks. On top of having a 2x structure and speedy stage design that allows room for exploration, Sonic 3, rather than fading to black, picks up right where Act 1 left off. What's more is, this also sort of carries over to going between zones. There's always a transition between the stages. For example, after taking care of Eggman and Hydro City Zone, the water beneath you blasts you straight up the ass, making you fall down in a marble garden. It really adds a nice sense of flow to the game, like everything that's happening is one massive adventure, even though the game only has about 6 zones. Yeah, you heard me right. There's only 6 zones in this entire game. Granted, these levels are really big and super fun to explore, on top of the mini-bosses, unique tracks for each act, a save system, and 2, technically 3, playable characters. But it just makes the game feel half-baked in comparison to Sonic 2, which, need I remind you, had 11 zones. Angel Island is your usual tropical starting stage, getting you used to the mechanics of how the game works, but feels completely different from Green Hill, Palm Tree Panic, and Emerald Hill by having its own visual style, further setting itself apart with the mini-boss of Act 1 setting the place on fire. It also had a really neat way of introducing the player to the special stages, forcing them to roll into a wall at the start of Act 2. That was pretty clever. A perfect example of show, don't tell. Hydro City, or Hydros City, or Andros City? Or however you want to say it, is a stellar water level, mixing in speedy segments dotted with slower underwater segments, aided by the bubble shield preventing you from scrambling for air. It's a pretty solid zone overall, and strikes an excellent balance between going fast and taking a short breather. Or, I guess, drowner, in this case. I especially like the mechanic where these speed pads hold you in place only for you to go flying down these blue canals. They're really great for spectacle. Marble Garden is some sort of ancient greenhouse temple on the mountainside, with you starting Act 1 barreling down the side of a mountain. I found the flying top mechanic a little awkward to control. It feels floaty and a little clunky, but I suppose that might have been the point. The boss here is cool, with Eggman destroying the ground below Sonic, forcing Tails to airlift him so he could hit Eggman. Playing the boss as Tails alone is annoying as hell though. You have to hit him in the tail end with Tails' tails as Eggman hightails it across the screen. Just a quick point of advice, try to find a fire shield, otherwise Eggman's jet exhaust will hurt you. Carnival Night is a carnival at night. I remember being really annoyed with this zone as Sonic. I was bouncing up and down and all around. I was not having a good time in my first playthrough. This zone is pretty much a pass for me. On top of that, there's the infamous Barrel of Doom in Act 2. Yeah, this doesn't really bother me that much, mostly since by the time I played the game, I had seen a few videos on the barrel, knowing that I had to press up and down on the D-pad repeatedly, but the fact that people had to upload videos on this at all shows how confusing of a mechanic this is. Eternal Cotton Candy themed damnation aside, Ice Cap Zone. I particularly liked how the zone opens up, being launched out of the cannon of Carnival Night and slamming into a snowboard, then snowboarding on the side of an iceberg. Tails just slams face first into a wall for his entrance, which is unfortunate. It's easily my favorite zone in the game. No hard times would be had here, but hard times was sung here. And finally, Launch Base Zone, or as I like to call it, Sharp Difficulty Spike. Yeah, I'm pretty sure 50% of my playthrough in this zone was spent slamming into enemies. The enemy placement here is really dickish. I mean, I get that the game is short, and on top of that, this is the final zone. It should be hard, don't get me wrong, but I feel like they cranked the dial a little too far here. They should have held back on the difficulty, I think. Or maybe I was just having a major skill issue. I don't know, you tell me. Odd difficulty spike aside, how does the game end? Well, after you beat the Act 2 boss, Sonic hops into Eggman's Eggmobile flying across the water. Knuckles, who's been causing you trouble throughout the entire game, shows up one last time to give you a little love tap before the nearby thrusters fire, causing him to fall into the water. And that's the last we see of him. The guy who's been giving you shit all game. Just splash. Moving on to the final boss, it's just this tower-looking thing. It'll fly up and down the screen shooting lasers. You'll get damaged if you attempt to attack it from the side, so you have to hit it on the head a couple times. Once you take that out, the real fight begins. The sky turns dark and the music becomes more grim and desperate as Eggman flies down with a new creation, Big Arm. The boss is decently challenging. It's definitely worthy of the title of Final Boss. It's sort of like the Death Egg robot in that its weak spot is in this awkward area, just a little above the arms. Of course, if you do accidentally jump into its hands, it'll fly off screen and slam you against the ground, even knocking the super out of Supersonic. Something I find to be really annoying about this boss in particular doesn't have to do with the boss's attacks or anything like that. It's just that if you die on this boss, you have to refight the first boss of Act 2, go through the cutscene with Knuckles, and refight the tower just to have another shot at beating Big Arm. It's really tedious, and I don't understand why there wasn't some sort of checkpoint just after getting out of the Eggmobile, or at least an option to skip the cutscene so you can get back into Phase 1 quickly. It's just a little nitpick, but it still bothers me that if I mess up the final boss here, I get kicked back 3 bosses and a cutscene. Sonic 2 did a similar thing, but at least there, it just knocked you back 1 boss, with that boss being relatively easy to take care of, all things considered. Breaking away from that little tangent, after being Big Arm, the platform above you disconnects, falling to the surface as Sonic turns around to see the Death Egg falling out of the sky with him. After that, I assume Sonic and Tails go kersplat on the ground because the game immediately cuts to the credits of the game. Yep, just like that. No clarification on what Knuckles' deal is, the Death Egg is presumably still operational, and the credits are rolling. This ending just confuses me. It's leaving so many things open, so many loose ends left untied, and that's exactly what this game feels like. It's a good game, don't get me wrong. It has good level design, fun mechanics, great special stages and ways to access those special stages, and good graphics, but it stops right when it feels like the story is just beginning. In any story, there's a general sequence of events. The introduction, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the conclusion. Sonic 3 has no falling action. It's a story with rising action and a climax, but its conclusion feels hollow because the story ends at the climax. But this video isn't quite over yet, as about 8 months later, on the 18th of October, 1994, Sonic & Knuckles was released to the world. I gotta hand it to him. That's one hell of a name for a sex tape. Yeah, you heard that right. A sequel to Sonic 3 in only 8 months. Kind of. Sonic & Knuckles acts more like a continuation to Sonic 3. The truth is, the developers had realized early on that they were running out of time, and so had made the hard decision to cut Sonic 3 in half, with this game being the other half of the original vision for Sonic 3. My experience with this game is actually a little more interesting. I'm not quite sure when I played it, but I know that Sonic & Knuckles had to have been one of the first games I've ever played. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the memory of me playing this game is one of the first memories I had. I remember playing the game at a family friend's house, probably when I was around 4 or 5. I distinctly remember not getting past Mushroom Hill because of this wall as Knuckles. I didn't know how to glide or climb walls, but I knew he could do it, so what I'd do is spam the jump button at the wall, hoping for something different to happen. Of course, that didn't work, so I'd switch to Sonic and still never get past Mushroom Hill because of these vines in the stage that latch on to Sonic that you had to spin dash out of. And since I didn't know about the spin dash at the time, I would just constantly try to pull away from the vines by running and jumping, and of course, that didn't work. The plot of this game is somewhat interesting, as it's actually split up into 2 separate stories, one for Sonic and one for Knuckles. Starting with Sonic's story, it picks up right where Sonic 3 left off, with Sonic landing in Mushroom Hill just after preventing the Death Egg from launching once again. Somehow losing all the Chaos Emeralds, Sonic pushes forward to destroy the Death Egg once and for all. As for Knuckles, taking place sometime after Sonic's story, a random Eggman-like robot powers on and starts wreaking havoc on Angel Island once again, so now it's up to Knuckles to clean up Eggman's mess on the island while putting an end to whatever plans Eggman's robotic duplicate has in store. A lot of gameplay elements from Sonic 3 have been carried over to this game. How you get into the special stages, the gameplay of the special stages, the elemental shields. If it was in Sonic 3, then it's more than likely that it's here too, although there are some small differences here and there. Namely the fact that there's no save system in this game, oddly enough. In its place is a simple character select with a choice between either Sonic or Knuckles. Yeah, no option to play as Tails this time around, which is odd to me given that Tails was in the last game and you did have the option to play as both him and Sonic last time. He's not even here when you select the option to play as Sonic, which just strikes me as odd. What happened to him? Did he get lost? Did he forget he could fly and go kersplat when he and Sonic landed in Mushroom Hill? Whatever the case is, his omission alongside with the omission of the save system from the previous game just feels outright jarring. Sonic & Knuckles is larger than Sonic 3, assuming you're accounting for Knuckles and all of his unique routes and bosses, that is, so it comes off as awkward to me that there isn't at the very least a password system of some kind. And as for the characters, again, you only have the choice between Sonic or Knuckles. Sonic controls just as he did back in Sonic 3, complete with the ability to tell pathological lies to young children by jumping and pressing the jump button again. As for Knuckles, he's a little slower and he can't jump as high, but in exchange he has the ability to glide by pressing the jump button after jumping and climb walls by hitting a wall while gliding and pressing up or down on the D-pad. The gliding itself feels real nice, and to my limited knowledge anyways, the glide either has no speed cap or has an absurdly high speed cap, meaning that if you find the right place to glide, you can absolutely blaze through these stages. While I'm on the guy, I should once again mention that Knuckles does take his own slightly different routes in the game. They usually aren't that much different, the only two major instances I can remember off of the top of my head being this breakable wall in Mushroom Hill, and the route Knuckles takes in Sandopolis Act 2 that has its own unique puzzle. On top of that, Knuckles' story is a little shorter than Sonic's story, ending with a boss in Sky Sanctuary since the Death Egg was destroyed, but yeah, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. The idea of the bonus game returns, but the Gumball Machine doesn't return. Instead, we have two new bonus games, the Slot Machine bonus game and the Glowing Spheres bonus game. They're accessed the same way as last time. Just pass a checkpoint with between 30-something and 50-something rings and jump into the stars that circle above it and you'll enter the bonus game. The Slot Machine bonus game is basically the rotating mazes of Sonic 1, combined with the slot machines from Casino Night Zone. They're alright since the rotation is in a smaller environment and your goal is always in the center, but I usually find myself trying to leave these bonus stages whenever I get them. I just don't find them as fun nor that useful. Basically, it's a way to gamble getting more rings and, by extension, lives and continues. And since it's a slot machine mini game, you have a chance to... Yeah, that. I'd just skip these if I were you. Gambling addictions aren't fun. Now, the Glowing Spheres bonus game is something I can get behind. You circle around these giant spheres, using momentum to launch yourself from sphere to sphere, outpacing a laser that will kick you out of the stage, all while running into these smaller orbs that turn into either rings, a random elemental shield, an extra life, a rubber orb that repels you, or a useless bubble that does nothing. I find these stages to be a lot more fun, mostly because the gameplay is much more engaging than bouncing from wall to wall, waiting for the item you want to come out, like the Gumball Machine from Sonic 3, or the Slot Machine bonus stage, which can actively harm you and relies too much on luck to be of any use. But it isn't just the bonus stages that have changed, but also the special stage layouts as well. Mechanically, these all work the same exact way as they did in Sonic 3, minus the new yellow sphere that acts as a spring, bouncing the player over a certain distance depending on how fast they're traveling. The new layouts are a fair bit more challenging. It felt like a natural difficulty curve after playing through all of the special stages from Sonic 3, but I'd imagine if you had played Sonic and Knuckles before Sonic 3, you'd have a lot more trouble with these. Once again, Super Sonic returns, and you transform into Super Sonic the same way, pressing the jump button after jumping while you have at least 50 rings, while Sonic also doesn't have an elemental shield. What's interesting is this time, Knuckles also has a super form, only further making me question why Tails doesn't in Sonic 3. And what's more is, since Knuckles can't use the elemental shield abilities, he doesn't have to lose the shield. Although, the method of transforming into your character's super form is still the same from Sonic 3, meaning if you have 50 rings and want to glide or use the insta-shield, you're gonna turn into your super form, which is still annoying. Moving on to the visuals of this game, they borrow a lot from Sonic 3, so pretty much anything I had to say about Sonic 3 mostly applies to Sonic and Knuckles. Locations are unique, everything is vibrant and colorful, just like Sonic 3. This time we'll go from the giant mushroom valleys of Mushroom Hill to Eggman's flying base of operations, Flying Battery, falling down into the sandy deserts and trapped temples of Sandopolis, falling deeper into the molten caves of Lava Reef, to the mystical and mysterious temple of Hidden Palace, to the beautiful floating temples of Sky Sanctuary, and in Sonic's story, to the mechanical nightmare on the edge of space that is the Death Egg. And as for the music, it's really good. The laid-back, bouncy theme of Mushroom Hill, the high-energy, dangerous feeling of Flying Battery, the slow, treacherous sounds of Sandopolis, and the mystical theme of Lava Reef. All of Sonic and Knuckles' soundtrack is amazing as always. It knows just when to be fun and bouncy, when to be energetic as all hell, and when to make the player feel a sense of curiosity, just like the level design. I will say, I'm not as big of a fan of the mini-boss theme here as I am of the mini-boss theme in Sonic 3. Sonic 3 has just had a specific punch to it that's lost in the new mini-boss theme. It tries to make the fights feel a lot more dangerous when one of the bosses is literally knocking itself over the head. Yeah, not that the mini-boss theme in Sonic and Knuckles is bad or anything. It's great, I just prefer Sonic 3's mini-boss theme. On the flip side, I do actually prefer Knuckles' theme in Sonic and Knuckles. It gives him a lot more character, and in my opinion, sounds a lot better than the short, kind of generic drum beat we got in Sonic 3. I won't bother going over the structure of the zones, as all of the changes to the zone structure from Sonic 3 have carried over to here. I will say that the game is a little harder than Sonic 3, however. Starting out with Mushroom Hill, it's a little basic for a starting area, but I can appreciate that it stopped the tropical theme and went for a more woodsy theme, with these giant mushrooms that you can bounce on scattered all throughout the zone. As you progress through the stage into Act 2, the color palette of the grass and mushrooms will change from green and reddish orange to a kinda dead looking orange and blue, all the way down to a definitely dead gray and sickly green. It's all because of Eggman's influence, because when you get to the end of the stage, you find Eggman buried in the ground doing something with some sort of satellite contraption. Destroying it restores life to the valley. That's a very nice touch. I will say, the game doesn't do as good of a job as Sonic 3 with introducing the player to the special stage rings, however. You just kinda have to know about them this time, which is a shame. Flying Battery is a great zone. I love how we get to see a little peek behind the curtain of Eggman's operations. I also liked how they hid some of the big rings here, by pushing some of these spikes until you fall straight into them. It was a neat concept, if a little bit cryptic. And I think my favorite part about this zone are the capsules where the animals usually are. This time, some of them contain rings, some of them act as springs, and others release badniks. I don't know if this is meant to imply that these capsules are what turn the critters Eggman captures into badniks, or if this is just how he deploys them, but it's just one of those small details that really makes you think a little bit. The boss here is also interesting. At least as Knuckles, since they never made a forward-facing sprite for Egg Robo, so it just looks like Eggman came back just to fight Knuckles again with a machine that didn't work the last time. Moving on to Sandopolis, I actually quite like this zone. Sorry, I'm just taking precautions. Yeah, that's why. The visuals are quite nice, and the fact that you're traveling through ancient desert ruins just adds to the cool factor. I know I said in my Sonic 2 video that I'm not usually too fond of desert-themed levels, but the more I think about it, the more I think I just don't know why I don't like Oil Ocean that much. The boss of Act 1 was pretty interesting. No matter what you do, you can't actually hurt it, it'll just rebuild itself. So what you have to do is knock it into the nearby quicksand. It's a neat puzzle, but once you realize that it just jumps towards you, it quickly becomes a waiting game. Act 2 has a really interesting mechanic with the lights. At first, as Sonic, it seems like these switches that turn the lights on serve no function, until halfway through the stage where you accidentally bust open this capsule that releases ghosts that will attack you if it gets too dark. That segment of busting open the capsule at the start of Act 2 actually serves as a little hint of continuity, since in Knuckles' version of the stage, the ghosts have already been released, with you even stumbling upon the capsule Sonic cracked open on accident. Later in Act 2, you run into these switches that open up doors for a limited time, and the sand that slowly fills the room. Near the end, you have to juggle pushing these switches, avoiding getting crushed, and keeping the lights on all at the same time. I can understand why people would dislike this. Again, you're juggling 3 things at once, but honestly, I found it to be really fun. Although there was this one stinker puzzle somewhat early on in Act 2 involving sliding down these sand falls that I still don't know how to consistently solve. Lava Reef Zone is alright, I guess. It has an interesting level transition between Act 1 and Act 2, with the magma cooling down and crystallizing after you beat the boss. But other than that, there isn't really much worth of note. Act 1's boss is really forgettable. In Act 2, while the build-up is cool as all hell with you inching closer and closer to the Death Egg throughout both Act 1 and Act 2, the boss is also just sort of meh. It doesn't give you too much trouble, so long as you snag the nearby fire shield and have decent platforming skills. The boss quite literally defeats itself, but instead of the usual 8 hits, this fucker tanks 14 hits total. Next up is Hidden Palace Zone, and on a visual level, it's really great. It feels so foreign and mysterious. Strange ancient devices and architecture appear here that haven't shown up anywhere else on the island, nor on Eggman's bases. But as interesting as this area looks, this zone pretty much only serves as an area to give Knuckles a piss-easy fight and show a cutscene. After beating Knuckles, an explosion goes off, with Knuckles immediately getting back up on his feet to see what's going on. As Sonic follows Knuckles, he finds 7 large gray gems, and in the middle there's one giant green one. This is the Master Emerald, and it's the source of that large energy spike that Tails picked up back in Sonic 3. Eggman's goal this whole time was to get his hands on the Master Emerald to harness its power for the launch of the Death Egg. Knuckles tries to prevent Eggman from stealing the Emerald, but he's electrocuted, with him and Sonic falling down to a lower level of the palace. After thinking for a moment, Knuckles decides that he can trust Sonic, and leads him to Sky Sanctuary Zone. Right away, I love this zone. High in the sky, running across ancient mystical ruins in hot pursuit of the Death Egg, all while Eggman sends out robotic duplicates of himself, setting up Knuckles' story. Combine the concept with the uplifting music, and it's almost like this is a victory lap, a celebration of Sonic's adventure over the past 4 games. This is especially apparent with the appearance of another robotic rival for Sonic, Mecha Sonic Mark II, a new and improved version of Mecha Sonic from Sonic 2. You encounter this guy 3 times, with the first 2 times having it pilot machines Eggman used back in Sonic 1 and 2. The 3rd time you encounter this guy, he takes you on personally and works almost identically to how Mecha Sonic 1 worked, jumping or rolling into one side of the screen and going back to the other side of the screen once his attack is over. At least, as Sonic. As Knuckles, Mark II is repaired and betrays Egg Robo, getting a supercharge off of the Master Emerald, causing it to have its own super form. This final boss was absolutely insane, especially if you have all 7 Chaos Emeralds. You spent all game thinking that the super forms are exclusive to both Sonic and Knuckles, only for Mark II to pull the rug right out from under you. Knuckles' story ends with him beating Super Mecha Sonic and retrieving the Master Emerald. Just as the platform crumbles beneath him, Sonic saves him on his plane, the Tornado, and helps Knuckles return the Master Emerald to Angel Island, forming a friendship that would last for years to come. As for Sonic's story, after Sonic knocks his 3rd robotic duplicate down, the platform below him begins to crumble, forcing Sonic to speed up one of the towers, once again just barely boarding the Death Egg by a thread. The zone itself is alright. I don't really know how to feel about it. I like the visuals, stone cold steel as you see the planet in the background combined with all the hazardous traps around, but the gameplay itself can be a little iffy. You have these cool transportation beam things that are used as a way to get from point A to point B, but most of the time I found that they actually took longer to use because I like to do loops. To be fair, it's neat for spectacle, and they can be pretty cool. They're just not my thing. The real thing that bothered me are these treadmill elevator things that are really hard to move on since they like to change direction at random. It wouldn't be so bad if the challenge was just trying to avoid slamming into the spikes on the walls, but they also have these missiles being shot at you which are a pain to avoid because of the treadmill constantly changing direction. There's also this gravity mechanic in Act 2 that's alright actually. I didn't mind it that much. I'm not exactly racing to get to it, but I don't think it's that bad, nor is the segment with the weird floating buttons. I'll chalk that one up to personal skill though, since I remember struggling with this chamber when I was younger. The first boss of Act 2 is pretty interesting. The boss will block Sonic from actually hitting it, so what you have to do is use the gravity mechanic to your advantage by making the spiking machines that it shoots out collide with its spikes first. After taking down that machine, Eggman flees into another Death Egg robot. This time it's absolutely huge, first attempting to crush Sonic with its fingers and then chasing after Sonic. This phase makes you hit it in its nose before it reveals its weak spot, the Master Emerald. You gotta hit it quickly though, since once it's exposed, the laser will charge up that you'll have to jump over before it closes its mouth and shoots a flame out of its nose. Even after taking care of that behemoth, Eggman attempts to escape with the Master Emerald, with Sonic immediately giving chase. Just keep pushing forward and jumping into Eggman until he's beaten. As he's beaten, the Death Egg once again goes up in flames, and this is where the Chaos Emeralds affect the ending. If you failed to collect the 7 Chaos Emeralds, Sonic falls back to the planet's surface, losing hold of the Master Emerald with it now forever being lost in the cold vacuum of space. But if you got all 7 Chaos Emeralds, you unlock the Doomsday Zone, a zone where you're flying through an asteroid field in the middle of space in hot pursuit of Eggman, who managed to snag the Master Emerald at the last second. The first part of this zone involves guiding Sonic through the asteroid field, collecting rings to maintain Sonic's super form. Losing all of your rings here will result in Sonic falling down to the planet below, causing you to lose a life. As you approach Eggman's escape vehicle, you can't actually damage it by running into it. Instead, you have to guide the missiles he's shooting at Sonic to the machine's head. During this part, Eggman will shoot other projectiles that will send you backwards and stun Sonic for a short time. After a couple times of hitting it, a cutscene will play out, depicting that what was destroyed was just an outer shell, and Phase 2 begins. In this phase, you have to ram into the robot from behind while avoiding bombs that will once again knock Sonic back and stun him. Even ramming into Eggman will cause Sonic to be knocked back, making the situation feel hopeless, amplified by the desperation of the music. This boss isn't all too hard, honestly. I'd argue that it's actually easier than the previous boss. That said, I still love the hell out of the Doomsday Zone boss. They really knew how to up the theatrics and go out with a bang. As Eggman's plans are foiled once again, Sonic grabs onto the Master Emerald, falling down to the surface as Tails comes out of nowhere, catching him and the Master Emerald on the tornado. Together, they return the Master Emerald to Angel Island, and the credits roll as Sonic and Tails fly away. Overall, Sonic and Knuckles, just like Sonic 3, is an outstanding game, even with everything it had carried over from Sonic 3, including its flaws. Sure, they made some odd decisions like cutting the save system and removing Tails from the adventure, but if you have the spare 2 hours, I'd give Sonic and Knuckles a shot. It still bothers me though, with how much these games share between each other and with how Sonic and Knuckles just feel so much more difficult in both the level design and special stages, it really feels like they weren't meant to be experienced apart. Almost like they're just 2 different halves of one grand whole. Huh. Oh my god, it really was a sex tape. Yeah, that's right. Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles can be united into one game called Sonic 3 and Knuckles, utilizing what Sega called lock-on technology. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the complete experience that Sonic 3 was supposed to be the whole time. It even has its own unique changes to incentivize playing Sonic 3 and Knuckles together, so let's get into those. To start out, it should go without saying that all the zones from both Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles are now playable, with some mild changes. Case in point, launch-based zone is much easier, allowing for a smoother difficulty curve. Tails is now playable throughout all of the Sonic and Knuckles stages, and likewise, Knuckles is now playable throughout all of the Sonic 3 stages. Knuckles' routes are once again different from the routes Sonic and Tails take, and in the first half of the game, the differences in his routes are a lot more substantial than the differences in his routes in the Sonic and Knuckles stages. The bonus games have also seen a merger, with all 3 bonus games being available throughout the entirety of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. And of course, how could I go without mentioning the Super Emeralds? The special stages of Sonic and Knuckles had different, more difficult layouts from the ones in Sonic 3, and this is the exact reason why. Starting with Mushroom Hill Zone, any giant ring will now flash several colors and transport you to the Master Emerald's altar in Hidden Palace. Coming here will cause the emeralds you've collected to turn into the gray stones seen surrounding the Master Emerald in Sonic and Knuckles. Doing this will prevent you from entering your super form as both Sonic and Knuckles, but is worth it in the long run. Hopping onto these giant stones will transport you to the special stage. Complete it and you'll return the emerald's color, collecting a Super Emerald. Collect all 7 Super Emeralds and you'll gain the ultimate reward: Hyper Forms. Before I get into those, I will have to place an epilepsy warning for the rest of this video. This is because there's going to be a lot of bright, flashing colors due to both the appearance of Hypersonic and his abilities. I'm not sure if Hypersonic could actually trigger any seizures, but just in case, if you're someone who's got photosensitive epilepsy, please skip to the timestamp on the TV right now. I'll try to avoid using clips of Hypersonic in the editing of this video, but just in case, I'm going to give you a chance to skip to a safe zone in the video right now. I'll catch back up with you there. Starting off with Sonic, we have the form that Sonic fans have been wanting to see in a new game for decades: Hypersonic. His quills pointing upward and his fur flashing between several bright colors. To top it all off, sparks are flying off of his body, showing just how powerful this new form is. In this form, Sonic is way faster and no longer has to breathe underwater. On top of that, he has a new ability called the Hyper Flash, an ability that allows him to dash in all 8 directions and take out most enemies on screen. Next up is Hyper Knuckles, who isn't as flashy as Hypersonic, but is just as powerful as him, with his speed and jump height being increased, along with the ability to slam into a wall while he's gliding, causing an earthquake that will destroy any enemies on screen. And finally, after not having a super form for what was technically 2 games, Tails has finally gotten a super form. Not a hyper form, but a super form. Once again, he's faster, invincible, and he can jump higher, but what sets him apart are the flickies that surround him that have also been charged with the energy of the Super Emeralds. These little critters are the real threat of Super Tails. They'll home in on anything and everything that moves, whether you want them to or not. Now, is it a little strange that Tails doesn't get a super form until he has all 7 Super Emeralds? A little. I do think consistency would be nice, giving Tails both a super and a hyper form, but at that same time, I also think that Tails only being able to have a super form through collecting the Super Emeralds gives off the same energy as collecting all 7 Chaos Emeralds for the first time in Sonic 2. You have to work twice as hard as Tails to get a basic super form, but in exchange, it's potentially the strongest super form out of the 3 characters. Is it as powerful as Sonic or Knuckles' hyper form? No, but the fact that he finally has a super form at all just feels nice to me. It really fits in with his character. Look, I could go on about all of the little differences between Sonic 3 and Knuckles together and apart all day, such as how in Sonic's story you no longer fight Big Arm or the little cutscene telling you about the Super Rings in Mushroom Hill. But this video is long enough, and as of me writing this, I have reached 22 pages and really gotta wrap this up. And so I will leave you all with this. Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles alone are great games. Excellent graphics, story, colors, music, the works. However, they are not to be experienced alone. Alone, they are like hot dogs with no french fries. They're alright alone, but they're missing something that would heavily complement the dish. Sonic 3 and Knuckles together is the Sonic game that has almost perfected the classic Sonic formula. And it's no surprise that this game is still talked about to this very day and will likely continue to be talked about for years and years to come. I remember saying in my video on Sonic CD that if you wanted to get into the Sonic series, then Sonic CD would be a good place to start. Sonic 3 and Knuckles would be the perfect place to start. It's the game that has almost perfected the classic Sonic formula and is the absolute best place to start if you're wanting to get into the original Sonic games. If you want to pick up a physical copy of both games, as of February 16th, 2024, Sonic 3 alone seems to go from anywhere between $10 to $40, with Sonic and Knuckles going from anywhere between $20 to $40. And of course, the game's also available on Steam through Sonic Origins, and for one final time, I have yet to play this version of the game, so I cannot speak on the quality of this version. Though, I've heard they've made some odd decisions, and due to some legal issues, some of the tracks from Sonic 3 had to be replaced, so do keep this in mind if this is the version you decide to play through. And finally, I'd be a fool not to mention Sonic 3 Angel Island Revisited, or Sonic 3 Air for short. It's a port of Sonic 3 and Knuckles that adds things such as widescreen and mod support, among other things, such as the ability to have Knuckles team up with Tails, and a bunch of achievements and customization options. You will need to find a bin file of the lock-on version of Sonic 3 and Knuckles in order to get the game to function, however. And as always, I highly encourage that you support the official release of the game, as does the developer of Sonic 3 Air. Holy shit! That was a lot to cover. Originally, the next video I was going to do was going to be on Sonic Mania, but I have done nothing but talk about the wacky adventures of a cartoon blue hedgehog for 4 videos in a row now, and I need a little bit of a breather. So what do you guys think about Rystar? You hit me! Damn it!